Doomed Moment by Songbird. She stood there, covered from head to toe in blood, guts and gore, both of the living and the dead. She was almost unrecognizable as she stood there, or would have been if not for her eyes. He swallowed hard as he held her gaze in that moment, seeing the pure devastation in her eyes as they held his gaze, seeing all of the memories of everything she'd seen and been forced to do, both of and against her will, in order to survive in the world she now found herself in. They were so haunted, so pained, so heartbroken as they held his own, and yet she didn't cry, and he knew her well enough by now to know why she would not allow herself to cry. With everything they'd been through, everything they'd lost along the way, if she gave in to her heartache now, if she let a single tear fall, they both knew the tears would never stop falling. Suddenly she took a step towards him, bringing him out of the maelstrom of his thoughts and bringing him back to the present as she took another step towards him, her eyes holding his evenly as she stopped to stand close enough to him she could have reached out and touched him if she wanted to. And yet she didn't, though he didn't blame her. She feared touch, intimacy as he did, and neither one of them were without their reasons for it. "I love you." Her voice was a whisper on the air, reaching out to him suddenly as he stood there, and his forehead creased almost imperceptibly as he held her gaze. And though such a slight action on his part would have been missed by anyone else because they didn't know him, she knew him well enough to see it, just as he knew her well enough to know that the sudden glistening light in her eyes as they held his own was a significant one. And where he believed he'd seen devastation in her eyes only a moment ago, it was a mere shadow of the heartbreak he saw in her eyes now in the wake of her admittance. And as her forehead creased, he saw tears welling up in her eyes as they held his gaze. There had been heartache in her admittance, surrender, defeat, and as she stood before him in that moment, he realized he'd never seen her more broken or more vulnerable in all the time he'd known her. Stepping forward, he saw her bow her head before him, and lifting his left hand, he moved it to gently cup her face in it, bowing his head as he wordlessly guided her into lifting her own until his forehead rested gently against hers, their heads bowed together. Despite the gore, despite the blood, her cheek was soft, smooth against the roughness of his hand, and feeling ashamed of the roughness of his hands touching her soft flesh, he turned his hand away, brushing the backs of his fingers across her cheek instead as he closed his eyes, swallowing hard over the fact that he knew what they both knew, that such pure, simple moments were doomed to be brief, and that there was nothing either one of them could do to change that. That wasn't the way the world worked. Not anymore. That's the end of that one. I didn't do my intro for this one for the same reason I don't do it for any of my writing or my songs that I share with you guys. That one's called A Doomed Moment. I just wrote it. You know, I like to let the words speak for themselves so that you can hear them and then, form an opinion based on hearing the work without worrying about the fact of who I am. I'm on this kick lately. I've been on it for a while now where, meeting different survivalists, talking to people about their ideas of what the end of the world would be like and, their ideas of what they would and wouldn't do and what is or isn't feasible or plausible. I've gotten on this kick where I've been writing some of my own and looking at how you would react to people and what your priorities would be then versus now does shift your perspective and bring different things to light. I've always treasured my family, my friends, the people that are closest to me. You know, I hold trust and honesty to a high regard, and if anything, working on these stories has made me even closer to my family and made me, appreciate them so much more. Because going into situations like that, you never know really what would happen or what you'd face if society fell apart. And it really would come down to who you could and couldn't trust. And there could be people you don't know now that you would know afterwards that would be vital to you. And what they were before wouldn't matter versus what they were to you in that situation. So I'm working on my mindset and working on characters, and it's been shifting my writing lately because I am trying to write my characters and the situations as realistically as I can without actually being in that situation. And learning to write for an audience after writing for myself for a couple of years there is a new and cool experience, and I wanted to know what you guys thought of how I worded it and whether it was visual enough for you guys, because I'm always working on how to improve my technique. And for me, like I always say, it's not me trying to write better than anyone else or me trying to compare or contrast myself to anyone else. Me personally, as a writer, every day I want to write better than I did yesterday. So I wanted to share this one, a doomed moment, with you guys because it shouldn't take everything falling apart for us to step back from our own lives long enough to realize how important the people in our lives are and what our priorities are, and if we are holding things above people instead of people above things like we should be. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So that was a doomed moment, a short story excerpt that I just wrote by Songbird. You guys have an awesome rest of your night, and let me know what you think. And let me know if you'd like to hear more of these, because I'm always writing quick throwaway things while I'm working on the stuff I keep. So you guys have an awesome rest of your night. Night, guys.